Yes, that's right. Sonic Team has, in fact, made numerous things besides just Sonic games. In fact, they've made quite a number of non-Sonic games. And yeah, generally people are aware of things such as Knights, but they've made lots of other games besides that a lot of people probably aren't that aware of, so I want to talk about Sonic Team's other games. However, the first game I want to talk about is technically not really a Sonic Team game, but I'm gonna count it anyway. The first game I want to touch on is Ristar, or Ristar? I don't exactly know how this is pronounced. I have a feeling this is a Final Fantasy X situation where everyone says Titus even though his actual name is Titus. Feels like his name is probably Ristar, but I'm just gonna say Ristar anyway, because no one has proven me otherwise. And yeah, this isn't a Sonic Team game, but you can kind of sort of count it as one for multiple reasons. Because Ristar is a game that is built off of one of the early concepts for Sonic. Before it was Sonic the Hedgehog, one of the ideas they were kicking around was this rabbit character that would extend his ears to grab onto things, and that idea was scrapped for Sonic, but it was eventually realized and transformed into Ristar, where now you're an anthropomorphic shooting star or something, and you have your extendable arms that you use to grab stuff and interact with the environment. So that alone is pretty neat. You get to see one of the early concepts for Sonic 1 realized into a full game. But then on top of that, Ristar also runs off of the same engine as the original Sonic games. But more critically than any of those, I think, is the people who made Ristar. Many of them had either previously worked on Sonic games or would go on to work with Sonic Team on future games. Many people who worked on this game had worked on Sonic CD, Knuckles Chaotix, Nights into Dreams, and probably the most prominent one that people are aware of is the character designer for Ristar was Yuji Uekawa, who of course went on to become the lead artist of the Sonic series. And you can definitely tell that just looking at Ristar, looking at his face and the expressions and stuff, you're like, yeah, that's definitely Yuji Uekawa's work for sure. Also, check out this robot right here. Pretty familiar looking, isn't it? That's pretty cool to see that clearly the E100 robots, it was just a robot design that Yuji Uekawa had previously come up with, and I guess he really liked that look for robot characters, so he wanted to keep using it. So with all those things in consideration, it's like, no, this isn't a Sonic Team game, but considering how many people that worked on this game would eventually become Sonic Team members, it's kind of like a retroactive Sonic Team game, many people would argue, so I would count it personally. And as for the game itself, I don't really have that much to say about Ristar. It's kind of just a solid 2D platformer. It's well designed, it's fun, it's good, there's not really that much left to say. Though one thing I did notice while playing through the game to get this footage is that Ristar kind of does have a little bit of traditional Sonic level design, where the levels can be multi-tiered, and the challenge does ramp up as you get higher in the level, and if you screw up, then you fall down to the lower tiers, which is pretty interesting. The design isn't generally built for speed, it's more like the higher areas have collectibles, extra lives, points, things like that, but still, very cool to see some Sonic level design bleeding into this game. If you haven't played Ristar before, I highly recommend checking it out. It is one of my favorite Genesis games. But now, moving on from Genesis to Saturn, of course, we gotta talk about Knights. And I gotta say, for me personally, Knights is such an unfortunate series because I love everything about Knights. I love the character, I love the character design, I love the art, the aesthetic, the tone, the mood, the feel, the premise. Everything about Knights is so freaking awesome and I love it so much. Except for the gameplay. I really do not like Knights' gameplay whatsoever. To be honest, I don't even really understand Knights, and I don't mean I don't know how to play the game. I know how the game works, and I know how you're supposed to play it. What I don't get is, why do people like it so much? There just seems to be so little to Knights to me. Because the gameplay of Knights is that you're flying around in a 2D plane and you have to collect a bunch of these blue spheres here, and then once you get enough of them, you can take them to the machine and you can destroy it and get an idiot piece, which you then take back to the altar, and that, like, completes that section of the level, and then you move on to another section of the level where you do it again, and you do that, I think, 4 times, and then you have a boss fight at the end. And each of these level segments where you have to collect all the blue orbs loop around themselves, so you can do multiple laps around the track, and every time you do a lap, everything respawns. So it's like, if you don't get enough of the blue chips on your first lap, you're gonna have to go back around again and try to get them on your second lap, or third or fourth, or however many it takes. But you also have a time limit, so you have to do things relatively quickly. But that's not everything, because Nights is a score-based game, and in fact, this was the first time that Sonic Team had ever implemented a ranking system into any of their games. And for each section of the level, depending on how many points you get, you'll be ranked either from an F all the way up to an A. And when you collect the Idia piece and you have to bring it back to the shrine, that's when the game enters like bonus time, where now you can try to use as much of the time you have left as possible to score additional points, doing as many laps around the track as you can, trying to get as much score as you possibly can before you go back to the shrine to cash it all in. And all of that stuff, when I just explain it, sounds like a fairly solid design, but then when you actually play Nights, I just don't really see how people are so into this game, because the core gameplay of Nights is just so bare bones and basic, which is not surprising for an early Sonic Team game, because that was kind of their whole MO with the Sonic games. They wanted to make a game that you could play with just one button that was very simple, and they just did that again here with Nights. But the thing about the Sonic games is that while they were very simple and straightforward, because of the physics and the level design of those games, they had extreme amounts of depth to them as well. And I just don't feel that at all with Nights. This game just is very simple, and there's really not that much more to it. All you do is move around in any direction in 360 degrees, and then you have a boost button you can do where you hold it and Nights boosts around, and that can work as an attack. Technically, I guess this is the first boost Sonic Team game, if you want to think of it that way. You even have a boost meter that you have to manage and everything. And you also have the paraloop, where if you fly in a circle, then the loop completes, and then that will interact with everything in the circle, either attacking enemies or collecting all the stuff in the middle, which is basically just like the Psyloop from Sonic Frontiers, so I guess they took that from Nights. But that's really it. Besides that, there's no mechanics to Nights. There's nothing here. You just kinda float around and collect stuff as you go through the levels, and that's really it. And it's not like Nights is a particularly challenging game, it's a fairly easy game to get through, so there's just not a whole lot of substance here, in my opinion. And the whole design of the scoring system to me seems very strange because, like, essentially, Nights' scoring system boils down to this. If you just get all the blue orbs you need and just get the Idia piece and go right back to the shrine immediately, then you're gonna get a bad score. But instead, if you get the Idia piece and then you spend a bunch of time looping the level over and over, doing what you've already done 3 or 4 more times, then you'll get a good score. Like, I understand that the idea here is you're supposed to be trying to, get better every time you do a lap through a level, getting a better time, and, getting more points as you interact with more stuff and you learn the path as you're looping around it. But again, there's not really that much to this gameplay, and it's not a very hard game, so there's not really that much to learn and improve run to run. You kind of just do the same thing multiple times in a row just to get points because you need points to get a good rank. In my own experience with the game, you don't get a good rank in Nights by being good at the game. You get a good rank in Nights by just spending more time doing stuff you've already done. It's just such a weirdly designed game. I don't see the same thing that people see in this. I just have never really found Nights to be a particularly fun game. And that is really upsetting to me because I wish I liked Nights, because everything else about it is so awesome. Of course, it's also worth mentioning that Nights did get a sequel on Wii, and I've never played that game, but from what I've seen of the gameplay of it, it looks like it plays exactly identically to the first Nights, so I presume that fans of the first game probably also like the second game. By the way, one quick thing I want to ask is, Nights got a redesign for Journey of Dreams, the second game, and how do people feel about Nights' redesign? Are people like, they ruined Nights, they looked so much better in the first game, or do people like Nights' new design? I don't particularly like one more than the other. I think they both look good. I'm just curious what fans of Nights think. Anyway, moving on to Sonic Team's next game on the Saturn, here's one that a lot of people have probably never heard of before, Burning Rangers. This game is a 3D action-adventure platformer, and it has a number of similarities to Knights. First one being that they are both games directed by Naoto Oshima, who was the original character designer for Sonic, and he was also the director of Sonic CD. And similar to Knights, it is a game where I love everything about it except for the gameplay. The aesthetic, the feel, the tone, the music, everything about Burning Rangers is so friggin' awesome. The premise here is that you're a bunch of, like, space firefighters, and you have to respond to emergencies, putting out fires and saving civilians and stuff, but it's all, like, futuristic and anime, and it's got all this mecha shit going on. You got a jetpack and stuff. And it's got a really cool aesthetic and vibe to it. The music is so awesome, and like it's got like the whole anime thing going on. Like it's got this really great anime opening sequence here. It's so fucking ridiculously like 90s anime as hell, and I'm all about it. But then you actually play the game, and it's really, really fucking clunky. I mean, first of all, it's a 3D Saturn game, so it runs like fucking shit, which means it's very unresponsive. But then even aside from that, the controls are very weird and sluggish feeling, almost kind of like it's tank controls, even though the game doesn't have tank controls. It just feels really bad to play, and, you know, the limitations of the Saturn are on full force here. The entire game takes place in these really tight corridors and small rooms because you can't render big 3D environments on the Saturn. The pacing of the game has a lot of issues because there's constant cutscenes and dialogue and stuff that breaks gameplay for way longer than it has any right to. The gameplay itself, there's not really that much here going on. There is some cool movement stuff, like you can jump really high, and you got a double jump, and you can do air dashes in any direction infinitely. Like, there's definitely some cool potential here, but it's just a really primitive Saturn game, and the Saturn already was really fucking weak on its own. Like, this game is way overly ambitious for the Saturn, is the main problem here. I think that if they had remade this on Dreamcast, or ported it over, or redid it, or saved the idea for later when the tech could actually allow them to realize it, I think Burning Rangers has a ton of potential to be something really cool and really fun. But unfortunately, this is all we got, is the Saturn game, and the Saturn game itself is like, not exactly what you would want for this kind of game with this kind of premise and feel and stuff. Honestly, considering all of his games have these same kinds of issues, it makes me wonder if maybe Naoto Oshima isn't the greatest at making games. Like, as a visionary, he's got really great concepts and ideas, and he's a great artist and stuff, but all the games that he's actually directed are quite lacking in the actual game department, I feel. And I'm including Blinx the Time Sweeper in that group as well. One thing I would say is that at the very least, you should absolutely go listen to the Burning Rangers soundtrack. It is really freaking good. Oh yeah, by the way, I guess one last little neat thing worth mentioning is the health system in this game. The way it works is that you have these crystals here that you get when you put out fires that turns into these crystallized things that you can pick up. And then these crystals form a shield that protects you from damage. So when you take a hit, the crystals explode out of you, and then you can recollect them. Now, where have I heard that before? Now, moving on to the Dreamcast, let's talk about ChuChu Rocket. The core of ChuChu Rocket is its multiplayer, and it has very unique gameplay that's unlike anything else you've ever seen before. The way it works is you have the ChuChus, these little mice guys that will automatically run in one direction until they collide with a wall, and then they will turn right. And then you have the Kapu Kapus, which are the big, weird, orange cat-looking things, which do the same thing, but if they run into a ChuChu, then they will kill that ChuChu. And you get points for guiding ChuChus to your rocket, and you lose points if a Kapu Kapu hits your base. And each player can place arrows on the tiles that when a ChuChu or Kapu Kapu steps on it, they will turn in the direction the arrow is pointing. So you want to point the ChuChus toward your base so that way you can collect them and get points, but you also want to use your arrows to point them away from enemy rockets so that way they don't get points, and you want to point Kapu Kapus at enemy bases so they lose points. And it's just a really hectic thing where everyone's fucking going crazy, throwing down arrows, and there's all this shit going on, and you just try to do your best to get as many points as you can and not lose points and make your opponents lose points and prevent them from getting points. And I've never actually played ChuChu Rocket with other people before, but I could definitely see this being a lot of chaotic fun, though I doubt that there's enough here to, like, really hold people for an extended period of time. is probably just a fun party game that you can play for maybe an hour or two, and that's probably all you're going to be able to get out of it. But as a party game, I guess it works pretty well. There is also some single-player stuff you can do in the game. There's like a puzzle mode where you have to try to figure out how to get all the ChuChus to a rocket, but it's not that great. Like, definitely the main meat of ChuChu Rocket is supposed to be its multiplayer. And considering how this game works, it makes me feel that this would have been a very good arcade game, but I don't think it ever had an arcade version. It was only ever on Dreamcast. It was also eventually ported to the Game Boy Advance, but that's pretty much it for ChuChu Rocket, although recently there was a brand new ChuChu Rocket game that was put up on Apple Arcade, which that's kind of cool for the 12 people that play games on Apple Arcade. Next up, we have Samba de Amigo, originally for the Dreamcast, though what you're looking at here is not the Dreamcast game, this is the Wii game from way later, because the original Dreamcast game required some specialized maraca controllers to be played, and I certainly don't have those fucking things, so I don't have a real way to play the original Samba de Amigo. I think you can play it with button controls as well, but, like, that's entirely defeating the purpose of this fucking game. So this is the closest thing that I could get for footage here. And, yeah, it's just a very simple rhythm game. You would put the maracas at different elevations, depending on where the little blue orbs are going towards the rings, and then you shake the maracas to match up with the beat. And that's really the whole game. Simple, but, you know, it's a rhythm game, so that's to be expected, and it is pretty fun. However, playing the Wii game, I definitely think that the controls are not very good. I've heard that the original Dreamcast game with the maraca controllers worked much better, because the Wii remote and nunchuck controls here do not at all work well. It is very unresponsive and very shitty, which is kind of a really unfortunate thing, because it means there's no really good way to play Samba de Amigo anymore, because most people can't play the original Dreamcast version, and the Wii version is not a great alternative. But, you know, there is that new Samba de Amigo coming out on Switch. Hopefully that works pretty well, and then we'll have a proper good version of Samba de Amigo we can play these days. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of the new aesthetic they're going for with the new Samba de Amigo. I much prefer the old school, like, very Mexican influence kind of stuff. Like, the art style of Samba de Amigo is so fun and joyous. It's great, but the new one, not exactly to my liking, but whatever. Last on the Dreamcast docket, of course, we have Phantasy Star Online, an MMO action RPG that went on to be a huge deal. And I'm gonna say right off the bat here, I've never played Phantasy Star Online. I don't play MMOs at all, so I really cannot judge how good or bad this game is or was. I don't really know anything about Phantasy Star Online. I'm just mentioning this here because it's a very big thing that Sonic Team did make. And they also made a number of Phantasy Star Online games, not just the original Phantasy Star Online, but they also made a couple other games, some spin-offs, a whole bunch of other things. But they don't do Phantasy Star anymore. You know, yeah, we have Phantasy Star Online 2, which is a very big thing, and then the new Phantasy Star Online, New Genesis, which is not called Phantasy Star Online 3 for some reason, which is weird, but whatever, I guess. That game kind of looks neat. It kind of has my attention a little bit, but I'm also kind of disgusted by MMOs, so I don't know if I'm ever going to try it. Now here's an interesting one. Next up is Puyo Puyo. I feel like most people don't know this, but the Puyo series is made by Sonic Team these days. They didn't originally create the Puyo Puyo series, but they have taken over it, and they have been making the Puyo series for a very long time. What I'm playing here is Puyo Pop Fever, which was on like GameCube, PS2, and all that. Which was not Sonic Team's first Puyo game. The first one they did was Puyo Pop on the GBA, but Puyo Pop Fever is the one where they rebooted the Puyo series with its current incarnation with all the characters and stuff, because for some fucking reason, this falling block puzzle game has, like, characters and a story, which is really weird, but I guess whatever. Which is kind of ironic, isn't it? Because, as many Sonic fans will be aware, there was Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine on Genesis, which was a reskin of the original Puyo Puyo game. And Sonic Team did not work on that original Puyo Puyo at all. It just was turned into a Sonic game for marketing purposes, and then years later, it turns out that Sonic Team takes over the Puyo series. It's kind of funny how that ends up working out like that. In fact, in the most recent game, Puyo Puyo Tetris 2, they had Sonic as a playable character in it, which I think is a bit of a wasted opportunity there. Should have been Eggman, would have been a good reference, but whatever. As for the gameplay of Puyo itself, I can't really say too much because, to be honest, I am fucking terrible at Puyo Puyo. I just really do not know how to play this game at all. The best I can do is like 2 combos, and that's really it. I really have no idea what I'm doing with these games, but they seem very fun and very in-depth, and they seem like there's a lot there. I just can't really figure it out with my tiny monkey brain. I'm personally much more a fan of Tetris. Which there is the Puyo Puyo Tetris games, which combines the two together, which definitely seems very cool, but I've never played those games before. I'm definitely interested, though. And honestly, it's worth mentioning just by itself how many fucking Puyo games there are, and how many of them Sonic Team has been making. Like, people nowadays say that the only thing that Sonic Team makes is Sonic games, and that is absolutely not true at all. They have made so many fucking Puyo games over the years. Like, people are always wondering nowadays, why does it take so long between Sonic games? It's because they're fucking making so many goddamn Puyo games, I swear. Anyway, next we have probably one of the most well-known non-Sonic games to come from Sonic Team, Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg. This is a 3D platformer collectathon fashioned very particularly after the Mario series, where you don't have those big sandbox-style levels and you run around doing a bunch of stuff to get all the different collectibles. Instead, this is that kind of mission-based design that they would use in the 3D Mario games, where you go back to the menu every time you get the main collectible, and then you have to pick which mission you're gonna do, and then you'll go back into the level, and now things will be modified for that particular mission, and so on and so forth. Which that alone is kind of interesting to me, seeing Sonic Team so blatantly try to copy the Mario formula for a game like this. Generally, most 3D platformers around this time were going more the Banjo-Kazooie direction with the, you know, the big levels where you can go around and do whatever you want. So that's interesting, but anyway, the main gimmick with Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg, of course, is the eggs and all the chicken stuff. You can roll around eggs, and with your eggs you can do many different things. You can dash around with them, you can bounce on them, you can, like, shoot them at enemies, and then you can get a bunch of, like, ricochets going on and stuff. And you can also grow the eggs, and when the egg is fully grown, then you can hatch it and get the thing inside. And these are often going to be some kinds of power-ups. It can be a little animal buddy that can hang around with you, and you can use them to do, like, special attacks, or it can be just, like, healing items or things like that, or it can be some kind of thing you can equip that will give you different abilities, like this one that lets you ride on top of your egg to go over water and such. In general, a lot of Billy Hatcher is pretty sound in terms of its design. It's got some neat stuff going on, but ultimately, I personally don't really find the game to be that fun. The general gameplay and game design and level design is just not really that interesting. It's very basic and just kind of You just go through the motions for the most part. It's not particularly challenging or fun or interesting. There's not, like, really cool puzzles you gotta solve. There's not a lot of great fun writing or anything. It's just very, very basic and by the books. There are definitely a lot of better 3D platformers from this era you can be playing. It's not a bad game, I wouldn't say, but it's definitely not an exemplary game in any way. I played it quite a bit back in the day as a kid, but anytime I try to come back to it now, I ultimately just end up feeling pretty bored. So, Billy Hatcher, I think you could probably leave this one behind. You're not really missing out on much. Oh yeah, here's one I almost forgot to mention. For some fucking reason, Sonic Team made an Astro Boy game on PS2. I have no idea why, but that happened. I don't know almost anything about this game. I played it for like 5 minutes just to get this footage here, and it was pretty bad. I think this game is very, very shitty, so probably just pass on this one. If you want to play an Astro Boy game, you should play the Astro Boy on GBA by Treasure. That game is pretty cool. And now we have a really obscure one that I'm sure most people have never fucking heard of before. Feel the Magic XY and XX. Which is a very strange minigame collection for the DS that's themed after this weird love story. It's a very bizarre game in terms of, like, its story setup and what's going on here, but the core of what it actually is just a very mediocre minigame collection focusing on the DS touchscreen. It's very mediocre. You could just not bother with this, and for some reason this game got a sequel, which is weird. And then, lastly, we have Sega Superstars. Not Sega Superstars Tennis, not Sega Superstars Racing, just Sega Superstars, which was a PS2 game that took advantage of the PlayStation iToy, which was kind of like a precursor to the Kinect, where it was a camera that it would detect you, and then you would move your body around to play various mini-games themed after Sega games. And this is kind of the beginning of the whole Sega Superstars thing. So for everyone that loves All-Stars Racing Transformed, you have this weird iToy game to thank for that. And you can definitely tell that this is a Sonic Team game because there is a disproportionate amount of Sonic Team representation in it. Fucking like half of the games are Sonic Team games. I've never actually played the game for myself because I don't have a fucking PlayStation iToy, but I'm gonna assume it probably is about as good as a Kinect game, which is not very good at all, but it's kind of a little bit interesting. I'd at least recommend checking out the various different minigames on a video just to see how they work. There's some kind of interesting stuff in there, but yeah, I don't think anyone is lamenting that this game hasn't gotten a modern re-release or anything. And there you have it. There is pretty much all of Sonic Team's games outside of just these Sonic the Hedgehog games. And yeah, to be honest, it's not a very great lineup overall, in my opinion. Like, Ristar is the only game out of this entire set that when I was playing them to get footage, I played through the entire game just because I was having fun with it. All of the other ones, aside from, like, Puyo, I don't think are super great games. Not that they have, like, giant fundamental flaws in a lot of cases. They're just not that fun. The only one that I really have much interest in playing more of is Samba de Amigo, if I could get a version that I could actually play properly. But everything else, I can personally pass on very easily. I don't really think there's that much of value going on in these games. I was initially thinking of making dedicated review videos for like maybe Ristar, Knights, and Billy Hatcher, as those are kind of like the most prominent ones, but I don't really have that much to say about Ristar. It's kind of just a good, straightforward platformer, and Knights and Billy Hatcher, I just don't really like those games very much, so I just don't really want to play them, so I did this instead. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.